I'm Matthew, this is Lemora's Cards, and these are the top 5 mistakes you're probably making in cEDH. Bum 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 boo-boo-doo-doo. Intro. Before we get into that, big shout out to my patrons, especially big $10 patron, LF Cruz. Thank you so much for all your support. Every bit of support I get over on Patreon very directly allows me to do cool new things on this channel. So you can support me over there, get access to early videos, get shout outs over here, all that good stuff. Also, you can support my merch. I got the new Turbo shirt, which I really like. Got the Stack shirt, we got the Corfield shirt, all kinds of good stuff over there. So check that out in the description below. With all that being said, let's get into what you're doing wrong in cEDH. cEDH is a hard format, so it's easy to make a lot of mistakes and in a lot of different ways. I've noticed a lot of the same mistakes though happen to players, specifically to cEDH. So there's a lot of like Magic general mistakes that you can make, but I think cEDH brings its own complexities that get added in, and I see a lot of the same things happen to new cEDH players. So here I'm pointing them out to you so that hopefully you can avoid them going forward, or at least recognize them when you do make them, because we all make mistakes. It's just learning from them that's the important part. No order, let's do it. At number 1, we have mulligans. That's right, just mulligans, because you might be doing a lot of it wrong. Now I have a whole video on this that you can check out over here. Did I point in the right here? Over here. Check it over here, I think. Some of the big ones that mess people up is just not wanting to mulligan as much as they should. A lot of newer people think that more cards are better. What if my hand gets worse? Blah, blah, blah. You're wrong. Get over it. You gotta have good cards, right? You're already down cards against the table from the beginning. You know, you're tier 7 against their 21. So what you're really looking for are just high quality cards. You want to have a game plan. You want to go forward. You need to be able to do the good stuff that your deck does, right? All these decks do something that is in some kind of way broken, and you got to be able to take advantage of that early, and you have to have a way to win. You don't want just, you have all mana in your hand, but your commander isn't a payoff, then that's not going anywhere. You know, be able to identify those bait hands, know what your deck needs. You want to be able to answer the questions that the table is going to throw at you. If you've got a turbo deck there, you might need that mental misstep or that force of negation, something like that. If you know that there's a stack ahead of you and they're pretty likely to put down a deafening silence, maybe reevaluate your hand that's like really heavy on the rocks and it's just kind of hopeful. I think most importantly, keep track of what went wrong, because you're going to keep hands that are bad, you know, period. And understanding what makes them bad is just going to take some time and take some repetition. So again, not going to talk about this one too much. Check out that video if you want to learn a little bit more about mulligans, but let's get on into number 2. Number 2 is mishandling hate pieces. Removing stacks pieces without a plan is probably the number 1 cause of king making in cEDH. Deploying them without a plan is probably number 2. Both sides of playing around stacks or other hate cards can lead to messing yourself up and ruining your own chances of winning. The big one that you'll see a lot is somebody removes a stacks piece, but they're unable to win the same turn, and then they kind of give the game to the next person who now is just uninhibited by the stacks and gets to do whatever they want. Obviously, this isn't great, so you want to kind of time that, understand what the stacks is doing to the table, evaluate like, is this hurting me more than it's hurting everybody else? Is it about equal? Is someone else likely to remove this for me? And then can I interact and then get to my turn and probably win? All of those different questions should be going through your mind whenever there's a stacks piece out, because often it's not just you it's shutting down. And if it is just you, then it is a pretty straightforward process. Just get rid of that thing. And then deploying them without a plan. Yeah, that can be just as big of an issue. Like, it's a lot of what makes the more artifact-based stacks pieces troublesome, because they often hit something more specific than like a rule of law, which kind of hurts everybody for the most part. And if you're deploying those without really thinking about what's going on at the table, you can really lock out, say, the Thrasios player that is just looking to play table police, and maybe open up the creature combo player who is just going to be jamming right through your deafening silence and not care at all. Or who maybe just can take over the game through the Trinisphere because it's just playing 3-drop at 4-drop and 5-drop or whatever through Kinnan or whatever. If you're playing with stacks or against it, you need to have a plan. You need to not just be getting rid of stuff or putting down stuff without thinking about it. You need to be meticulous, and you need to be specific with what you're trying to do and really have that game plan in mind of how this affects the table and how this affects me. Do I really need to remove it, or can I wait a little bit? Number 3, we have tunnel vision, which is a little related to a lot of these things, but I think is easy to overlook when you're doing it. Have you ever worried so much about one player that you completely missed on another player taking over the game? You might be thinking no, but that's just how much you missed it. This can happen a lot where people get kind of set on somebody being the threat because they deployed a lot of early mana and maybe got some sort of advantage thing going. But as the game goes on, it might kind of shift away from them where like maybe they just run out of gas. They don't have anything to do with all their mana, all their draws are just lands. And people can still be kind of fixated on dealing with that player even when someone else has started actually getting what they're supposed to be doing going online. So I really suggest keeping your threat assessment present. Consider who's tutoring, who has the most stuff in play, and not really so much as like who had the best start, because that is a way to win a game. But if that start isn't converting to a strong mid game and then eventually a win, then it doesn't really matter who had the best start. If somebody else tutors twice, it's pretty likely that they're the threat now, especially if they're sort of on a more proactive game plan. But this can also apply to the plays that you make. So for instance, your tutor targets. A lot of times you can be thinking about like, I need to tutor for this piece, when you draw that worldly tutor. And then as the turn goes by, information has changed, but maybe your processing of it hasn't, or you haven't really updated the thinking like, you know what? This now actually isn't as good as it was. Maybe I should be thinking of different targets. Maybe I shouldn't even be tutoring into this board state at all. Somebody now is representing an opposition agent, and I think they're likely to have it. Anything like that. You really want to be open at all points in the game. You want to be thinking about all of your options, especially the higher color your deck is. If you're in something like a blue farm or a Dawnbreaker Thrasios, where you have a lot of tutor options and a lot of different ways you can go. Almost every tutor represents the option to get some way to interact, get some way to build advantage, or get some way to try to force a win. And knowing which of those things or even something else to do is going to be really key in winning games with those higher color piles. And then all of that sort of goes to what I like to think of as the current objective. It's like Halo Reach. Sometimes your current objective just survive, right? And you're mystical tutoring for Swords to Plowshares to deal with the Winota. Or the objective is to just get out some bit of advantage under what's happening because the game is slowed down. So what your overall game plan is should be like in the back of your mind, but really think about your current position in the game and what you actually need to do to win this game right now. Not what your deck is trying to do necessarily, but how do I win this game? And sometimes that also means turning your brain off of, okay, well, I need to survive this turn and stop them to, well, is there an ability for me to win here? Because a lot of times people will be so fixated on not losing, they'll not even realize that they actually have the win in hand, or it's just one different tutor away from that. And so making sure that your brain is always able to just like identify the real objective that you should currently have, like the best thing you need to be doing, and then execute the best way to do that. And that ties in really well with number 4, mistiming your win attempts. There's like a common idea in cEDH that the person who goes for it second is the one who usually wins, usually because of like interaction gets spent stopping them, and then the other person just gets to go free. And I think it is partially that, but also I think it has to do with the later your win attempts are, typically the easier it is for you to be able to enact them. If you have more cards in hand and more mana represented and more stuff, it's going to be easier for you to win, especially if someone else has spent up interaction, right? Sometimes the issue isn't that you're going for it first, it's that you're going for it and you don't have the mana up to use, let's say, your 2 bits of interaction that you have, right? Sometimes just waiting a turn cycle, especially if you can get a feel that no one's really about to win. I think in cEDH a lot of times people feel a pressure to win because it is sort of a fast format, but it isn't always there, right? So a deck like Blue Farm, for instance, I see a lot of times, and I've done this myself, where they will force a win earlier than they need to, even though a slowed down game is currently benefiting them. If you're on a deck that looks to win closer to those turns like 4, 5, and 6, after getting a ton of advantage, and where if no one's doing anything, it benefits you. Those are not the types of decks that you want to be, blowing yourself out with, trying to go for an Underworld Breach win, and then you sack your LED, and then you get hit with the Boseiju or something like that. You really don't want to get screwed in a scenario where you were already favored to win, and you just didn't wait to make sure you have that like silence plus SWAT plus whatever, blah, blah, blah. So big things are, know if you're in a position where you have to force a win, know that if your deck gets better as the game goes, and understand the odds before you place a bet. So knowing like, hey, everybody seems to be tapped out. The blue player didn't interact with this last kind of threatening thing. So maybe, Force is offline right now. You don't want to just say, oh, I have the turn 2 nods, go for it, without any thought into what's going on. You really want to consider what interaction has been spent, what mana is currently available, anything that might let you get some info on whether or not this is the time to do it. Because really at the end of the day, every time you go for a win, it is gambling. Unless you know every card in every player's hand, you really don't know what's going to happen. You're going to end up having to gamble, and that's fine, but just try to know your odds before you start putting money down on it. Number 5, the biggest sin you can commit if you want to get better at cEDH is not learning. This is an educational channel. You could probably tell that by how unentertaining it is. So learning is pretty big here. You're going to make all these mistakes. I've made all these mistakes. That's how I know about them to tell you. And acknowledging that you made them and learning from them is huge, because I think a lot of people, they make these mistakes and they don't think about it. They just say like, oh, RNG got me, or they just don't evaluate what brought them here. And a lot of times that can be tricky. I'm not saying that I'm perfect at doing it or anybody is, because a lot of times you make a mistake on turn 1 or 2 that ends up causing you to lose on turns 5 or 6. So being able to track all of that is pretty tough, but keeping yourself present in the moment, keeping yourself accountable, trying to track everything that you do, right? When you do something that makes you lose, really keep that in mind that like, hey, this was bad in this spot. And then a lot of these scenarios don't exactly perfectly replicate themselves, but you will get a feel the more you play of these positions and how safe they are or how pressured you are and really like where you need to go from here. But you're not going to do that if you're not paying attention and if you're not like really committing that to memory that like, hey, this was bad here, this was bad here. I need to avoid this scenario. I need to try to get into this scenario. Another big thing I think a lot of players do is getting caught up in their win rate to the point where they even like stop playing or they just like don't want to mess up their win rate. Like they just want to avoid losses, and losses are going to be your best way to learn. You want wins, but you want to be able to enjoy losses. You don't want to be devastated every time you lose, or you're going to miss out on good experience, because every time you get a loss, it's like, okay, this is a new way that I can get a little bit better. I can improve my game plan. Even if that's like, well, I lost turn 1. I didn't mulligan to deal with a turn 1 win. I knew there was a deck that could have won on turn 1 and I didn't play for it. Sometimes you're going to get bodied. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it isn't. And just trying to keep all that in mind. Just try to learn from all of these different experiences to the point where you get a better understanding of it, because really you're never going to master a game as nonsensical as cEDH is. I don't think, at least. You can get pretty good at it. You can get good at Magic and you can win more games, but there's always going to be learning. And so that's always going to be the best thing you can do, is just keep your brain open to learning to be as good of a player as you can be. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found this helpful. Maybe you even found it a little bit entertaining. Who knows? But yeah, if you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't. Support me on Patreon if you want. Go get some merch if you want to show how cool cEDH is to other people. Check out my podcast, Learning cEDH. New episode of that coming out soon. With that being said, go play cEDH.